Welcome back. I'm Akinyemi Olushola. This is Stena Varsity Reading and Memory Academy. Today, we are going to be looking at principle versus method. This is the reason why learning is difficult. The first thing that we'll talk about today is what is the essence of knowing about principle and method. And before we dive into that, let me quickly tell you to invite everyone to join this session. The session is meant for parents, school administrator, students in tertiary institution, students in secondary schools, but it does not include those in primary school. They do not have the previous knowledge that can help them understand this message better. There are certain terminologies they may not be able to grasp. So this video is meant for everyone that I have mentioned. Please call them, share this video to them, tell them about what we are doing here as we explore it together. Now, why do people learn and it is difficult? First and foremost, what is method? When we talk about method, we are talking about a specific way or techniques that you use to get things done. So method varies, it changes, and it is adaptable to whatsoever that you are learning. However, when we talk about principle simply refers to a foundational truth. It is universal, it is unchanging, it is almost the same for whatsoever you are using it for. For example, a good example of principle is the law of gravity. You understand? It is the law of gravity. So wherever you stand on the earth, although the value may vary, but you are acted upon by gravity, because it is gravity that keeps you sustained, or else you would have fallen. That is an example of what principle look like. When we talk about method simply refers to strategies, your techniques, or the way that you use to get things done. And getting things done is not always done the same way at different times. And this is where learning becomes difficult. Like I've said in the previous voice note, that I harped so much on previous knowledge. And one of the ways that you can be sure that you are actually learning is after you are done learning, assess yourself. When you carry out an assessment, then you can be sure that you have actually learned. So today, we want to look at the practical implication of principle and method in learning and why learning is difficult. So let's jump right in. Quickly, let's consider the 3-box memory model. There is something in psychology called the 3-box memory model. It was founded by Richard Atkinson and Richard Schifrin. So those are the two guys that it is called Atkinson-Schifrin method. 3-box model, memory model. That's how it is being called. And this 3-box memory model talks about the stages of memory from the time that the information reaches your sensory memory down to the working memory and then to the long-term memory. This is a principle. If you are learning and you easily forget what you are learning, this principle is where you belong. You will find your place there. There's no learner on earth that does not find their place in this Atkinson-Schifrin principle. You find your place there. This learning is done in such a way that if you do not know the right method to use, if you do not understand the underlying principle behind what you are doing, you are going to have a lot of challenges when you are learning. Take for example, you want to learn mathematics. In the previous video, I said earlier that you cannot even go forward in learning mathematics if you know nothing about arithmetical sign. You can't manipulate arithmetical sign. So what are we talking about? Simple division. You can't do it without punching calculator. What are we talking about? Your efficiency will be low. And if you recall us as well, I said that any method is effective so long as it causes you to think. Thinking is difficult. If you cannot think, I can't help you. Thinking is hard. And that is why people shy away from thinking. But for as long as you want to learn and you want to make the most out of your learning time, you must be ready to abide by principle, because principle is universal, it is unchanging, and it does not bend to your whims and caprices. It does not bend to your whims and caprices. So quickly, let's look at a few examples. The first thing that I want us to consider is the sensory memory. The sensory memory is the aspect of your memory where the information gets to your sensory organs, like your ear and your eyes. As I'm speaking now, you can hear me and you can see, because this is an audiovisual conversation. So you can see me and you can hear me. That is your sensory memory. And the information that you had now can only be held for a few seconds. For a few seconds. Don't forget I said that if you cannot think, you cannot be helped. You cannot be helped if you cannot think. It is thinking that makes learning much more better. It is thinking that makes learning much embedded in your memory. If you refuse to think, you cannot be helped. There's no way that you can be helped. So information that gets to your sensory memory is going to stay there for a little time, few seconds. And that is why you can only put few information in that place and it can stay for a few seconds. And after that, you will not remember again. That's why you say, you told me your name just now. Can you say it again? The reason was because that information does not go beyond the sensory memory. And until you take the information beyond the sensory memory, you cannot make the most out of it. A lot of times, people are multitasking. Multitasking has proven to be ineffective. That is not to say that you cannot multitask, depending on the cognitive load of the activities that you are engaging. So if the cognitive load of what you are engaging is something that can run in the background, that does not require full attention. Maybe you are washing your clothes and you are listening to music. You can run both together, because washing your clothes and listening to music does not require higher cognitive load, because it is not a complex activity. But if the information you are dealing with is a complex activity, you find yourself that you cannot multitask. So multitasking, or if you are not paying attention enough, is going to steal the information from your sensory memory, because information is not meant to stay there forever. It is meant to be there for a few seconds. And after a few seconds, it evaporates. So the second box memory model is the working memory. This one is called 5+2 retention. That is 5 plus or minus 2. So that is, you can keep up to 5+2, which is 7, or 5 minus 2, which is 3. So that is, the memory can keep up to about 3 to 7 stuffs at once. That if it goes beyond that, you will not be able to keep it again. So that is the working memory. And mind you, in this working memory, there's something called memory leak or memory loss. Also, through your sensory memory, there's memory loss or memory leak. That is why when you listen to something now, in the next minute you discover you can't remember it again. It is because you capture that in your sensory memory. And the sensory memory is meant to hold things for very few seconds. What about the working memory? The working memory is meant to hold things for a few minutes. It does not go far. And what you are holding there is 5 plus or minus 2 information that you can keep there. Any information that goes beyond that, you discover that is going to also leak. And the third box in this memory model is called long-term memory. The working memory can be called short-term memory, but it is better to call it working memory. The third box is the long-term memory. This is a principle. You cannot violate it. So a lot of times when you are taught something and you forget it, so it is between the sensory memory and the working memory or short-term memory. That is why you learn stuff and you forget. Somebody can say, what about trauma? We'll get there. Even though you don't want to remember traumatic experiences, they will surely come back. We'll talk about that later. So that's why you have to watch till the end. So let's talk about the long-term memory. The long-term memory simply refers to the part of your memory where information stayed for a very long time. However, as time goes on, there's also memory leak in the long-term memory. The long-term memory may not stay forever. The reason is because I told us in one of the videos that the brain is a complex interplay of different parts, hormones and organs working together. And the explanation is beyond the scope of this our teaching. The explanation is beyond that scope. However, you must understand that there are many things that are playing out in your memory when you are learning. And if those things does not play out well as they ought to, there shall be memory loss. This is a fact. If you learn something, if somebody tell me that they learned something and they forget, I know the cause. I can predict where the problem is. It is a fact. I can predict it. However, the long-term memory undergoes two things. Although there's memory leak in all of these three boxes. There's memory leak. However, the leak in the long-term memory takes a long time, because the brain has a way of eliminating information that we don't use so that it can accommodate new information. Or it can put some information in your subconscious mind such that since you're not using it, it will just be there. Because there are other things that you need to engage that require higher cognitive load. That is what it means. So in the long-term memory, two things should happen there. We are supposed to have encoding, and we are supposed to also have retrieval. If you do not, please pay attention here. Do not miss this. Do not miss this. If you do not pay attention very well, you can miss this. So don't miss it. There is something called encoding. Encoding simply means a way by which information is being registered in your memory. That's encoding. And if an information is wrongly registered, it will be wrongly recalled, or you may not even be able to recall entirely. That's the way it works. The long-term memory requires you to encode appropriately. And encoding is a separate teaching that we are going to do in another video. So I may not touch upon that, but encoding simply means where you put information into your memory so that it is impressed there, it stays there. The brain knows how to do those things once you use the right technique, which is the method that varies to put it in your memory. That is the encoding. And for the information to now finally stay in the long-term memory, there's a need for retrieval practices. Retrieval practices simply refers to that you pull up what you have encoded again to make use of it. And that is where application comes in. So if you have a way to apply what you have learned, what you are doing is that you are retrieving that information all over again. And the more you retrieve, the better encoded the information becomes. However, encoding is a separate phenomenon on its own that refers to the registration of an information in your mind by the activities of your brain cells, which we call neurons. So it knows how to do the job, and it will put it there so long as you use the right method to put it there. So there's a need for encoding, proper encoding, and there's a need for retrieval. So as you are learning this information now, if you do not go back after some times to retrieve it again, then there will be memory leak, even though you have already encoded it. If you do not practice retrieval, you will surely have a leak of the memory. So once again, what are the 3-box memory model? So we have the sensory model, the Fox box, sensory memory. The second box, we have the working memory. And the third box, we have the long-term memory. Between the sensory memory and the working memory, we have the selective attention. Selective attention. Selective attention simply means that you pay more attention to a particular information above another information. That's selective attention. You can be doing many things, but there is selective attention, meaning that a part of your memory pay more attention to some things than you can imagine. For example, now imagine that you see something that we call distinctiveness. I will explain that in another video. Distinctiveness simply refers to a uniqueness about something that goes against the regular way that it would have occurred. So this uniqueness will lead you to be able to look at things in a distinctive manner. This has not always been like that. For example, if you enter the school campus and you now found a zebra walking on the road, that's distinct. You understand? So you give it selective attention, because your attention will go there. Wow, this is unusual. Why is zebra walking inside the campus? You get it now? So it is selective attention that helps the information to stay in the working memory. So if you give it the right selective attention, you can hold up memory in your information in your working memory for quite a number of time. This is a principle. So between working memory and long-term memory, you have the encoding and practice retrieval. If you practice very well, you discover that you learn better. And one of the ways to also practice what you have encoded is to teach somebody. It is called Feynman technique. Feynman technique simply means you find a concept, then you learn the concept, you teach the concept, and you review the concept. That's what Feynman technique is about. You will discover that students in school who are A students, the more they teach you, the more they know. That's Feynman technique. So one of the ways to practice what you have encoded such that you can impress it strongly in your memory is to teach others. When you teach others, it helps you to impress the information into your memory. So this is a principle. Now let's talk about method. Method simply refers to techniques, the strategies that you use to drive home a point. Now, we have looked at sensory memory. We say it can stay there for a few seconds. We look at working memory. We say the information in working memory stay up to about, sometimes it can stay up to 3 days, depending on how you put it there. But the information that stay in the long-term memory, it takes more effort. And this is where people run away, because people do not want to apply effort when learning. If you understand how this thing works, if you understand this explanation, you will be able to learn better. So let us look at method before we cite a living example for what we are talking about. So method simply refers to the way by which things are done. It is adaptable, it is changing, and it is not the same. That is the way method is. For example, now, you may want to learn about the 9 planets. You can use the acronym. For example, MVEMJSON, Mary very early in the morning, join Sunday on faithful night party. Acronym simply refers to the using of the first letter of a list of items to form a word. We have Roy G. Beef. That is the color in a colorway of a rainbow. Roy G. Beef. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and other stuff like that. But you cannot use acronyms for a complex problem like calculus. You can't use acronym for calculus because you don't have a lot of list of stuff like that you can put in there. So that is why method is not constant. It is changing. It is adaptable. So that something work here does not necessarily mean it will work there. And this is where students have problem. You will have difficulty learning if you do not understand that method varies, but principles remain the same. So if you are learning something now and you are giving it selective attention, what you are doing is that you are putting that information in your working memory. And working memory can only keep up to 5 plus or minus 2 information. And it can stay for maybe a couple of days and you forget it. And that's why you will like, but I read that thing and I know it. No. If you are cramming, please pay attention. If you are cramming, you are only putting the information either in your sensory memory or in your working memory. That's what you are doing when you are cramming. The moment you pour what you have crammed down, you can't remember. Why? Because you are cramming the information without understanding it. There is zero understanding. You just want to ram the information in your memory with zero on that. You don't care about understanding, but just to remember. And that is why the moment you pour it down, you can't recall again. So a lot of times, when you see students reading, their operation is simply between sensory memory and working memory. And I told you how you know you are dealing with working memory is because you gave it selective attention. For example, now you are reading and you are checking WhatsApp. You are reading and you are checking TikTok. You are reading and you are gisting with your friends. Some people cannot even read with music. So you should stay away from music if it will cause distraction for you. You may go and get white sound, like a sound of a rainfall. So a lot of time people have difficulty learning because the only area they have ever worked on is in the working memory. And working memory can only keep up to 5 plus or minus 2 information. And it is for a couple of days before it will go. How do you now remember what you are learning? And I emphasize so much, whenever I'm teaching, I emphasize so much on paying attention to anything you are learning now. Because whatever you learn now becomes a foundation for the next information on who the brick will be laid. So if what I'm learning now is not properly understood, by the time I'll be learning the next thing, I will have problem. And that is why you discover that the curriculum of anything you are learning has been designed in such a way that you move from simple to easy, to easier, to difficult, to more difficult, and complex. That is where you move. They cannot put the complex information first for you to learn. No, you start from easy to difficult to complex. That is the way it works. But a lot of times, people have difficulty learning because they don't know that the method they are using is violating the principle that will keep the information in the long-term memory. For information to stay in the long-term memory, there must be proper encoding. There must be proper encoding, and there must be practice retrieval. In fact, encoding is more important than retrieval. A lot of time, people want to retrieve an information they have not properly encoded. If an information is not properly encoded, you cannot effectively retrieve it. That will take me to a traumatic experience, because somebody can ask, but I don't want to remember a traumatic experience, but it keeps coming back. The reason is simple. I told us the other time that the brain is a complex organ in the body, and it has a lot of complex interplay of hormones, of parts, and all the stuffs, interconnected neurons working together to get you to where you should be. So I've said that earlier. However, the encoding of traumatic experience is separate. It is different from what you are learning. The brain has been designed in such a way that it has a security system to keep you safe. If you have once put your hand, maybe mistakenly, on a hot iron, the brain will keep that information that next time you see an iron, it will always come to your memory to keep you safe. That is why. So traumatic experiences are encoded separately in the brain. That explanation is beyond the scope of this learning. That explanation is beyond the scope of this learning. Traumatic experiences are encoded separately in the brain for security reasons, so that because you cannot be repeating the same thing over and over. It is there so that you can be able to have certain memory of things and to keep it there. And that is why you don't even need to try to remember traumatic experience before they will haunt you. It is encoded separately. The brain does those things, but it is also in relation to the activities that you engage that depends on how deepened and embedded the encoding of traumatic experience is going to look like. However, the information you want to deliberately learn is not encoded like that of traumatic experience. So you may need to retrieve it. You don't need to try to retrieve traumatic experience before you remember, because it is a security system that the brain has set in place to keep you from repeating certain things. So if flood, for example, sweep some of your loved one away, I'm sorry if anybody is there that flood has sweep your family away. I'm not using you as an example. This is just to drive home a point. So if flood has taken away some member of your family, anytime the rain is about to fall and you see the gutter overflooded with erosion, what do? The memory will kick in that don't try that. Don't try that. Some people, they have been raped, so they don't trust people anymore. The memory always kick in, even though, in fact, it is called intrusive memory. Traumatic memory, they are intrusive memory. Even when you are not ready for them to come, they will keep coming back. But there are therapeutic things that you can do to balance the way the intrusion of a traumatic experience will come back. So traumatic experience is also encoded in the long-term memory, not in the short-term memory. That is the wonder of the brain. Traumatic experience is encoded in the long. You cannot forget easily. Even though when you don't want to remember it, it is an intrusion into your memory lane. It will always come. However, if you want to learn any skill or you want to learn any course, it is a deliberate action. It will not just get into the long-term memory. There is an effort. There is an effort. There is difficulty that you must overcome if you will let the information be embedded in the long-term memory. So the technique varies, but the principle remains. So the principle for putting the information beyond working memory into your long-term memory is very simple. Encode it properly. Encode the information. That's why I gave us another principle the other time, and that principle is called the 3 hours of memory. That principle is called the 3 hours of memory. Please give me one moment. All right, I'm back. The 3 R's of memory. The 3 R's of memory is a principle and you cannot violate it. If you try to bypass that principle, no matter the method you are using, you will discover that it will not go past the working memory. It will not be embedded in the long-term memory. There are courses that you do that you will offer that course from year 1 until the end. So for such a course, you can't afford to keep any of the information in the long-term memory because you will need to be retrieving them every now and then. For example, now, if you are a student in physics class, you must understand that the acceleration due to gravity G is 9.81. But in secondary school, they will tell you it is 10 meters per second square. But in tertiary institution, they will use 9.81 for acceleration due to gravity. You can't afford to forget it. Because in some exam, they may not even give you the value for G. You will be the one that will slot it into the question. And you must know it is 9.81 meters per second. Till you will leave physics, you will always use acceleration due to gravity anywhere it is required. And it is 9.81 anywhere on Earth. So these are information, that 9.81 now has to be encoded in the long-term memory. Because if you put it in the working memory, there's memory leak in the working memory. There's memory leak in the sensory memory. These things are principles. They are inviolable. If you try to violate them, learning will be difficult. Especially for courses that you need to learn such that you need the previous knowledge to learn the next one. You can't afford. If it is a course you offer once and you drop it, then you can put information in the short-term memory. So that is all that we have for today. So how do we practice what we are talking about? Please give me a moment. Yeah, my apology. So how do we now practice all of this? Let's look for a particular example to drive home the point. Let's say you want to learn maybe social study, or you want to learn psychology, or you want to learn maybe web design or graphics design, or whatsoever that you want to learn. You know, if you want to learn graphics design, they will teach you the color wheels. They will teach you types of colors, complementary colors, hint, hue, all these stuff like that. They will teach you how color mix together. You will know about all of the elements that you use in design, the rule of design, hierarchy, visuals, and all these stuff like that. You will be taught all of those things. Now, if you will understand that skill that you are being taught, it is important for you to go beyond just being part of the webinar, or if it is a live session. No, you must go past that. You must go ahead and lay your hands on some things. In fact, it will even help you to take some notes while the session is on, because the note that you took is going to encourage you better. Because after the whole event is over, if you do not take any notes, you may even not be motivated for anything. But when you consider the time that you spent taking those notes and how attentive you were, because taking notes requires attention, how attentive you were when the class was going on, you will be motivated to want to check it. You'll be motivated. But if you do not take any notes, there's no motivation, and you can't remember everything. Like I've said, the working memory can hold 5 plus or minus 2 information, and for a very short period of time, and there will be leakage with time, because that's why it is called short-time memory. It does not hold information forever. Like even in the long-term memory, there's memory leak there. There are information that are properly encoded, but because of age, because of time, and because you don't retrieve them regularly enough, it can leak, even though you properly encode them in the long-term memory. So the encoding is much more important. So the way your reaction towards learning is so important than the learning itself. Your reaction towards learning is more important than learning itself. And this is where people have difficulty learning. So if your mindset is, this thing is difficult, it cannot be done, anything you learn will not go past the working memory. It will not go past there. The reason is because this thing is difficult. I hate that man. I hate this skill. This skill is difficult. Automatically, you'll be giving it selective attention. And I told you, the the gap between sensory memory and working memory is selective attention. And the moment you are giving it selective attention, not your full attention, you discover that it will not go past the working memory. And the working memory, for a couple of days, you forget it. Because it will not be encoded and you will not even make any effort to retrieve it. So the way learning becomes easier for you is that the moment the memory, the information hits the sensory memory, as I'm speaking now, you are hearing me and you can see me. So the moment the information reaches your sensory memory, so it goes into the working memory. If you paid attention, it goes there. But if you do not pay attention, if somebody tell you their name right now, in the next few seconds you won't remember again, because it does not go past the sensory memory, and the leakage of information there is very fast. And that's why somebody can dictate phone number for you, but you can't remember after 10 seconds again. The reason was because that phone number that the person called does not go past the sensory memory. You only hear it with your ear. You never paid attention. And if you pay attention, then it will stay in the working memory for a while. But because it is not enough to pay attention, you must encode the information properly. Once you encode it well, then you must also engage retrieval practice. Then it can be stored in the long-term memory. Even in the long-term memory, if you don't use the information often, there's tendency of leakage as well. So there's leakage in all the three boxes. There's leakage there. So this is why learning is difficult. Learning will be difficult because you do not encode appropriately. So the next video I will be doing will cover how to encode. How to encode. That is the way it works. How to encode. If you do not know how to encode, you'll be wasting your time learning, because whatever you learn stays in the working memory. It will not go past the working memory, or except it is properly encoded. So it is only in the long-term memory that information stays almost permanently, even though there are leakages there. But the leakage takes time. But there are some sort of leakages there, but information can stay there better. So today, assess your attitude towards learning. So if you discover that you hate a particular skill, or you hate a particular course, and you don't want to talk about it, you don't want to read it, then automatically you will not give it enough attention as it deserves. So, and if you are doing that, it will be stored in the working memory, and that's why learning is difficult. And once it is stored in the working memory can only hold it up for a couple of days, and it will leak. Once the information is leaked out of your memory, you can't recall again. Now, if you are learning the next topic, where are you going to lay the brick of the next topic? What you learn today will become a foundation for the next information you'll be learning. And that's why learning is difficult, because people do not understand the difference between principle and method. In principle, you do not change it. It is universal. What I've just explained now affects every woman. Every human being fits in any of these three boxes. Every human being fits in any of these three boxes. So today, assess yourself. Look at your approach to things. Do you make effort? Do you even know what encoding is? That will be the next thing we'll discuss in another live session that we have. So let me entertain questions before we go. Let me entertain questions. Do we have anybody who has questions? Let me entertain question before we go. Do we have anybody who has question? So while I am waiting for people to ask question, there are other extra information you may want to know about sensory memory. Please pay attention. Like I've said earlier on, this video is meant for parents, it's meant for school administrator, students in tertiary institution, and it is also meant for teachers. Yeah, and you can say I have grown past learning. It's a lie. You have not grown past learning. You will soon become a parent. If you are listening to me now and you are yet to be married, you will soon be married. You will have kids, and you have to teach your kids, because what I'm teaching here, they do not teach it in the mainstream school. It is not in the school curriculum. Nobody will teach you the information processing theory. That's what we are looking at, which I call the 3-box memory model. Nobody will teach you. It is not taught in the school, so you don't know it. So that is why you need to learn this, because when your children begin to grow, you can show those things to them. Learning is easier, whether you are learning a skill or it is an academic learning, whichever one. Once you understand the principle behind it, you can learn. There are people who watch videos on YouTube and they are able to learn some things on their own, but with practice. And there are people that needed a more knowledgeable order, MKO, to guide them, and they will also learn. So it is either of the ways. So there are further information about all these things that you can know. You know, when we talk about the sensory memory, its capacity is very, very small. You understand? The sensory memory has a very small capacity, and the information there does not last. But when we talk about the working memory has a limited capacity, 5 plus or minus 2. You understand? That is 5 plus 2 or 5 minus 2. So, and information there, it lasts for a while. You must bear this in mind. So, anytime you forget an information very quickly, the reason is because it does not go past the working memory. And the reason it didn't go past the working memory is because you only gave it selective attention. So that is the channel between sensory memory. When it falls on your ear, your eye sees it. That's the difference. So, and the long-term memory, it has a very great capacity. Very great capacity. And information lasts longer, very long enough. However, like I've said, if you do not retrieve information from time to time, do you know the implication? The brain will see it like the information is not useful for you. So it will first go to the subconscious mind, and as time goes on, there can be leakage. You may not remember again. And that's why you will need a cue or trigger to pull it back, because it has not been completely deleted. You know, there's something called traces in memory traces. So if the traces of the memory in your neurons is still there, although the information is not tangibly available, so the brain has a way, you know, it is a complex interplay that it can bring up that information all over again, even though it's been a while that you can't remember. But when you get a cue or a trigger, you can be able to recall what you have learned. This is very, very powerful. That's why people have difficulty in learning. The problem is because they never go beyond the working memory. So once somebody tell me about something, I can tell that the information has not gotten to the long-term memory. Information that stay in the long-term memory stay forever. Even though there will be leakage, they stay for a very long time. Because there must be proper encoding. There must be proper encoding. And the proper way, another technique that can help you in encoding is the 3 hours of memory, where you register the information very well. That is why whenever you are reading, you must pay attention. Then if you register the information, then you can be able to retain it. If you can retain it, then you can be able to recall. So that is the right way to encode. Although there's still more, we'll talk about that in another video. Do we have anybody who have any question? If you have any question, let us know. We'll answer them before we call it a day. Do we have any question? I'll just hang around for quite a little moment. If there's no question, then we'll have to call it a day. So this is the reason why learning is difficult, because the information never went past the working memory in this 3-box memory model. So if the information actually get to the long-term memory, you must have done something, and we call it encoding. Encoding simply refers to the way that your brain organizes, process, and embed information in your memory such that you understand it, you can pull it up again. That is encoding. So you cannot tell me you encode information appropriately where it is not well organized in your brain. It is your brain that does the job, but there are techniques that facilitate that. So if it is not properly encoded, then it will not get to the long-term memory. Because if you do not properly encode it, so you are still going to remain in the second box, which is the working memory. So why is learning difficult? Because people remain in the second box, which is the working memory. They never encoded information, but they want to retrieve it, and that is cramming. You never properly encode an information, and you are trying to retrieve it. That's not going to work. You're not going to get results doing it that way. You are doing the right thing the wrong way, and you will get frustrated, and you can abandon the whole thing. So that will be all for today. Once again, my name is Akinyemi Olushola, and I'm the lead instructor in Tenavacity Reading and Memory Academy. What do? We teach things that are not being taught in the school. and it cut across, maybe you are learning a skill or you are in an academic setting. And our institution with this, our stakeholder, they are parents, school administrator, teachers, and students in tertiary institution, excluding those in primary school, because they do not have the previous knowledge that will necessitate and facilitate whatsoever that we are going to share with them. So till we come again, ensure you engage everything that you have had. If you do not engage it, what you are doing is that you are putting yourself back in the second box, in the 3-box memory model. So see you another time. Good afternoon.